In this video, we're going to cover all the topics on the Information Systems and Control exam. We're going to go step by step through the AICPA blueprints so you know which topics are on the exam and which level of understanding you need to know for them. Is it remembering and understanding where you simply need to know a rule, or is it application or analysis where you need to actually apply the rules? So after we go through this, you'll have a better understanding of the wording of the blueprints to where you can go step by step and see which topics you already know and which ones you need to study a little better. So with that, let's jump in. So the first thing to highlight about the ISC exam is the content area allocation. We have three main sections. The first one is Information Systems and Data Management. This is going to focus on accounting information systems, enterprise resource planning systems, and talk about how you can properly store data. You can see that's 35 to 45% of the exam. Next is security, confidentiality, and privacy. This is talking about what are the different cybersecurity threats that could occur, what are the steps for us to mitigate these threats, and what kind of incident response plan should we have in place. Section 3 is considerations for SOC engagements. This is talking about SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 engagements. How do we plan for them? How do we actually perform them? And how do we report on them? The next notable thing about the ISC exam is the skill allocation. The remembering and understanding section covers 55 to 65% of the exam. Remembering and understanding simply means recalling a basic term or definition. So you don't have to apply it to a scenario, but you just simply need to know a definition or recall a piece of information. This is much higher than the average exam has for remembering and understanding. For example, the FAR exam only has 5 to 15% of questions as remembering and understanding. So if you're good at regurgitating information and memorizing a lot of data, then you could really thrive in this exam. Now let's jump into the details of the first area, Information Systems and Data Management. So first is on information systems. So we want to know about IT infrastructure, such as what is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. We need to understand how the COSO frameworks help address the IT infrastructure. From there, we need to know about enterprise and accounting information systems. So what are the benefits of an ERP system? What are the disadvantages of it? How can we use these systems for the use of blockchain? We need to talk about how we can improve the performance of accounting information systems. So this is all focused on accounting information systems. From there, we're focused on the availability of information systems. This is involving a disaster recovery plan, business continuity plan. We're talking about mirroring versus replication. We're talking about downtime for when the service goes down. We're also talking about the different types of backups that we need to consider. And from there, we have change management. So when we change between different types of software, what should we consider? What are the different environments that are used? What are the different types of tests that are performed? Should we do a direct transition, a parallel transition, or a pilot transition? And we need to consider patch management as well. So the last section of Area 1 is on data management. Here we're focused on the methods of collecting data. Once we collect it, we need to actually store the data. So we could store it in a warehouse, a data lake, a data mart. We're also talking about database schemas like a star or Snowflake. Then we're talking about the data lifecycle. From there, we look at relational databases, which involve comparing different databases through the use of a primary key, secondary key, and foreign key. From there, we need to examine a standard SQL query. So we need to know the common commands, the clauses, operators, aggregate functions, and string functions. So this is the data management section. So now we've made it to Area 2 of the exam, which is security, confidentiality, and privacy. First is regulation, standards, and frameworks. You'll notice that all of this is remembering and understanding. So it's simply recalling these requirements and standards. So we'll look at the HIPAA standards, GDPR standards, and multiple other standards. From there, we move into security. We want to know the different types of threats and attacks. So we want to know about internal versus external threat agents, threat actors, attackers, and hackers. We want to know the types of attacks, such as a distributed denial of service. And we want to know the techniques used in a cyber attack, such as a buffer overflow. So it's involving understanding the different types of attacks that could happen. Then we continue in the threats and attacks section. So we have the stages in a cyber attack. We then want to know how the cybersecurity risks relate to the Internet of Things, to cloud environments, to mobile technologies. And from there, we explain threat modeling and threat landscape. Once we understand the threats and attacks, we can focus on mitigating these threats. So we can talk about how you use a VPN to mitigate these threats, how you use endpoint security, etc. Then we talk about vulnerability management. We talk about layered security and defense in depth. We talk about the difference between least privilege, zero trust, whitelisting, and the need to know principle. And then we talk about acceptable use policy for technology. From there, we want to know how the COSO frameworks can help us to assess cyber risks. Then we want to focus on internal controls, preventive controls, detective controls, and corrective controls. Then we focus on identification and authentication techniques and technologies, such as how we manage our passwords. Then we talk about having the proper authorization model. Should it be discretionary-based, role-based, or mandatory? So then we go into the testing section. So this is where we test to ensure that our approaches for mitigating risks are appropriate. So we'd perform procedures to obtain an understanding how the entity communicates information to improve the security knowledge and awareness. We would provide input into a security assessment report, documenting the issues, perform a walkthrough of all of their procedures. We're just simply testing their approach for mitigating their risks. Then we move to the section on confidentiality and privacy. So we're going to explain encryption and the different techniques of encryption. We'll talk about the difference between confidentiality and privacy. From there, we talk about data loss prevention. We also talk about the implications of a data breach, of what and how it could impact a company. And then we'll talk about controls and data management to collect, process, store, transmit, and delete confidential data. Then we go to the incident response. So we'll talk about the difference between a security or cybersecurity event or incident, how we can use insurance as a mitigation strategy. We'll talk about the different roles, responsibilities, methods, and steps in an incident response plan. And we'll perform procedures to test whether they're actually working or not. Then we move to Area 3, which is considerations for SOC engagements. The first section is on planning and performing a SOC engagement. So this includes everything from understanding the trust services criteria, understanding management assertions, knowing who the users are of these different reports, knowing what the independence requirements are, how materiality is calculated, how we perform risk assessment, how we determine that an organization is a subservice organization. And we also talk about the inclusive versus the carve-out method for subservice organizations. So we're considering everything involved in a SOC engagement. From there, we talk about what happens when we discover a fact after the engagement. We talk about the complementary user entity controls and how those affect the engagement. We talk about management's written representations, like the management representation letter. So we're talking about everything from start to finish of a SOC engagement. So then once we perform the SOC engagement, we need to report on the SOC engagement, just like an auditor gives an auditor's report. So we need to know how a complementary user entity controls affects the SOC report. We need to know how the carve-out method versus the inclusive method affects the SOC report. We need to know what types of opinions we have whenever the deficiencies have been identified. And we need to prepare results of testing of controls to be included in the SOC 2 report. So we're focused on the reporting side of the SOC engagement.